The Legend of Zelda, Mega Man, Super Mario Bros., countless series that originated from the video game resurgence, which came with the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985, still persist to this day. But back then in the 80s, stories were typically simple in their execution. Explore the desolate planet to kill the big brain, defeat robots to stop the mad scientist, save the princess from the giant turtle. Wait, no. Ox. Thing? Whatever, just beat the shit out of this poor man with a 1 in 99 record. While systems like the various Magnavox Odysseys and Ataris existed, the NES ushered in a new era for video games in the home setting, and nailing fluid, interesting gameplay was typically the goal for developers. But there were developers shooting for something a bit more ambitious in the narrative department. And was that no more apparent than the Metal Gear series? Without hesitation, I can say that the Metal Gear franchise is iconic, and the story is my favorite of all time. That's not just video games, that is every medium available. However, as a huge fan, I realize that the series might be intimidating to players looking to jump into it. Immense amount of cutscenes and dialogue, games reaching all the way back to 1987, confusing names like, why are there 2 different games called Metal Gear? What? And perhaps an unclear series order, like 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, that makes sense, but then we have Peace Walker and Revengeance? It can be a lot. So, because I absolutely adore this series and think more people should experience the wonderful characters, themes, and campiness Metal Gear has to offer, I'm here to give you the lowdown on what the series is, in addition to several recommendations on where you can start your Metal Gear journey. As a result, this video will be free of spoilers, and discussion will cover synopses and general content. If you don't know me, welcome. My name is K Jewelers, and this is a beginner's guide to Metal Gear. Metal Gear, at its core, is a stealth-based series published by Konami and helmed by famous director and cinephile Hideo Kojima. Having said that 70% of his body is composed of movies, it's no secret that he has an adoration for the silver screen, and that infatuation has heavily inspired the way he creates games and their focus on a narrative presence. Kojima himself has cited the Bond series as a massive inspiration for the basis of Metal Gear, and the DNA of other pop culture works such as 2001: A Space Odyssey, 1984, and Escape from New York and Los Angeles have been implanted into the story beats and themes of the series. While working at Konami in the late 1980s, Kojima would be asked to lead the development of the first Metal Gear game, which was released in 1987 on a home computer commonplace in Japan known as the MSX. Due to hardware limitations dealing with the number and colors of sprites, the typical combat action game that was requested from him wasn't feasible, which led Kojima to steer the game toward its stealth focus and build both the setting and narrative to serve the gameplay. Metal Gear performed well enough to kick off the successful series it became. From there, Kojima would work on several other games, but Metal Gear became his most popular work, and he would continue to work on the series up until the last mainline game, Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, and his exceedingly messy departure from Konami. Although there were actions allotted for players to handle situations more aggressively, Metal Gear's emphasis on sneaking past the enemy and not engaging was a rarity at the time. Today, there exists a fair share of stealth-based series with extensive sandboxes, or even games that simply incorporate stealth elements, and that's thanks to the innovation of Metal Gear. Mutually important to Metal Gear's identity is the beautiful art provided by Yoji Shinkawa. He's been an integral part of the series since 1998 with the original Metal Gear Solid, and the pieces he's churned out are nothing short of impeccable. Some pieces have this airy quality to them that takes advantage of the blank canvas around the art, while others are gritty, detail-filled. His style is incredibly unique and elevates the specific characters depicted or themes of the respective game. I highly recommend looking through his catalog at some point. But as the series evolved with the creation of Metal Gear 2, Metal Gear Solid, and and so on, the story became deeper, as did the gameplay. Metal Gear is what is known as a tactical espionage action franchise, or simply a stealth series that has action elements but rewards the player for being undetected in most games. That's not to say that you can't mix it up and go full Rambo. You might have to for a boss, but most of the interesting items available in the sandbox are stealth-oriented. The cardboard box is synonymous with Metal Gear, but you can also distract someone with food items, or lay a naughty magazine to lead a guard off of their patrol path. And you know what? If all else fails, rocket launcher? The first time you enter a room, it might be a puzzle of sorts, figuring out the best way to weave around the guards to reach your destination, or perhaps you search around for items or resources. As you gain more of a familiarity with the environment, you might feel more comfortable experimenting with more tools. You could trank the enemy from afar, or give them the good old stranglehold. Just be careful not to overdo it, since enemies typically have 3 states: alive and moving, unconscious, and dead. To support its anti-war themes, the games typically reward the player for opting for non-aggressive engagements, such as in Metal Gear Solid 3, where the player can be given a camo for taking out a boss via depleting their stamina rather than their health. But like I mentioned earlier, this can be done in a number of ways. One of the beautiful things about Metal Gear is the ensemble of small details widely spread and made available via gameplay. The series is dripping with this level of polish and charm where I'll see someone play the game and do something I never thought was possible. There's also just a fun sense of exhilaration as you try your best to stay under the radar or quickly hide to wait out an alert phase. It just feels like a very cohesive experience. Yet, the story and characters are what I believe make Metal Gear. As previously mentioned, Metal Gear's numerous narratives typically place the player in control of a Special Forces operative as they navigate some sort of location or facility in the hopes of completing their objective, usually destroying a giant robot with the title of Metal Gear, which can launch nuclear missiles. Throughout the mission, the player will be exposed to character relations, plot twists, and oodles of historical and science fiction tidbits of varying validity, which is admittedly one of the most charming aspects. Sure, lady in my earpiece, I'd love for you to tell me about the hit 1956 film Godzilla King of Monsters for 2 minutes, or the non-venomous Japanese flying squirrel? Can they be venomous? Metal Gear is just a strange series, like, unabashedly weird at times, and God, I freaking love that.
Ma, there's a weird fucking stray cat outside!
You can pilot a box that acts as a tank, or just beat an entire boss by shutting your PS2 off for a week, and then you come back to find they're dead. What series does that? On the other hand, due to the consistent threat posed by the nuclear strike from a Metal Gear, the series deals with anti-war and anti-nuclear weapons themes in addition to loyalty, finding one's own path in life, and much more. This ability to balance this campy nature along with these riveting, emotional stories is one of Metal Gear's greatest successes. One moment I can be laughing at how I snuck past an entire squadron in a cardboard box, and then tearing up an hour later. That success primarily comes down to the characters and how they grow over the course of the saga, which largely springs from their interactions and how the writing parallels them. We have Solid Snake, the face of the franchise, as well as the lead in several games. He can seem like a cold, badass agent, but you find out there's a lot of depth to his character, and a reasoning for why he acts how he does in Metal Gear Solid. This character gets the worst hand dealt to him in every facet of life, just bombarded with drama, but it's incredibly compelling since he finds some strength or people to fight for that push him to keep going. Naked Snake? Listen, I get it. It sounds like a suggestive name, but he offers a more expressive Snake who has to endure his own share of troubles, creating a character arc that runs parallel with Solid Snake superbly. Their shared experiences aren't all too different, but the beauty or tragedy rather, is how they each handle their respective situations and how that may or may not redirect their character arcs. As you play for the saga, you can see how Solid Snake's experiences with someone like Otacon or Big Boss shape his character going forward and his view on life in a way that actually feels like these characters are developing realistically. In part due to the high number of people with the codename Snake, it's a series about loyalty and whether we put that faith in ideas or people, how we can choose what to pass on to the next generation no matter what systems try to bind us. And life can hold whatever meaning we choose to ascribe to it. It's inspiring as hell. Truthfully, I can't jump into specifics without spoiling the saga, but I haven't really seen characters grow and change over the course of an entire story like they do in Metal Gear. In years past, Metal Gear has earned this reputation for having overly convoluted narratives, which I unfortunately feel intimidated people from getting into it. I realize that lengthy exposition-heavy stories in video games might not be your cup of tea, and that's perfectly fine. There is indeed a lot of dialogue and cutscenes, which falls in line with Hideo Kojima's fascination with film. And don't get me wrong, those variables are dense with information. This series is batshit insane. However, I mean that in the best way possible, and I find the confusion has been over-exaggerated. If you're someone like me who loves stories filled to the brim with details that keep you coming back, or an enthralling narrative experience that utilizes the affordances of the hardware to tell that story, I think you're gonna like what you find. Hopefully, if any of that information piqued your interest, you're now wondering, where should you start with your Metal Gear journey? And luckily, I can help with that. I find with most series that hold a consistent, multi-entry running narrative, it's highly recommended you start at the beginning. So you're trying to play Kingdom Hearts, but you started with Kingdom Hearts Free. My friend, there's a free in that title. Of course, not everybody has access to the necessary consoles or funds to start at the beginning of every series, but it's usually my recommended preference. However, when it comes to the Metal Gear series, I don't think that's exactly the case, as I believe there are 3 great starting points for players to get their feet wet with all things tactical stealth espionage related, which are the following: the original Metal Gear, Metal Gear Solid, and Metal Gear Solid Free Snake Eater. In order to find out what would be your optimal starting point, let's discuss the following titles so you might assess and select which game you believe would give you the most enjoyable first experience. Metal Gear is the first title ever released for the saga and came out in 1987 on the MSX2. Some people might be familiar with Metal Gear on the NES and assume it is the same game, but that's not actually the case. The NES version is hard to describe, but essentially it's a port filled to the brim with localization errors, cut content, and weird story changes, like you don't even fight a Metal Gear. That's kind of like playing a Zelda game without Zelda. This comparison doesn't actually work, does it? For all intents and purposes, the MSX release is the true first game in the series, and the one I'd recommend playing. The foundation for the plot is as follows. In the year 1995, the Western world heard word that an independent nation named Outer Heaven, founded by a legendary mercenary and stationed in South Africa, is constructing a nuclear weapon. In order to properly assess the situation and neutralize the potential threat, Special Forces Unit Foxhound deploys a well-regarded agent known as Grey Fox into the nation. However, contact between Foxhound and Grey Fox is severed several days later, leading to great concern. The only information Foxhound has to work with is Grey Fox's last transmission, which reads, Metal Gear. In an act of desperation, Foxhound's commander sends rookie agent and protagonist Solid Snake on Operation Intrude N313 with 3 main objectives: infiltrate Outer Heaven, locate Grey Fox, and discover the truth behind the subject of his final transmission, Metal Gear. As Solid Snake, you will sneak past guards, procure equipment, and make contact with Resistance members as you aim to accomplish your mission. Now, when it comes to playing this title, getting an MSX2 as well as a physical copy of the original Metal Gear might be kinda difficult, yet there are other means of doing so. My recommended route is picking up a copy of the Metal Gear Solid HD Collection, or Legacy Collection, with the former being on PS3, Xbox 360, and Vita, and the latter being PS3 exclusive. Metal Gear Solid 3 is a part of both collections, and that's the title which comes with the original 2 MSX Metal Gear titles. And finally, Metal Gear Solid 3 will also be a part of the upcoming Metal Gear Master Collection, that's at least coming to the PS5, but likely the Xbox Series S and X, as well as PC. Despite being the first title released in the Metal Gear series, Metal Gear is not the title that originally gained widespread recognition from players. That honor is reserved for the timeless 1998 PS1 classic, Metal Gear Solid. As the third title released in the beginning of the Solid subseries, Metal Gear Solid sees the return of legendary soldier Solid Snake following the events of Metal Gear 2. 10 years following Snake's mission in Outer Heaven, Foxhound has gone rogue and taken control of the island of Shadow Moses in Alaska. The group is also in possession of the newest and most iconic Metal Gear in the series, Metal Gear Rex. Rex is capable of launching a nuclear missile, and Foxhound threatens the US government with this strike unless they meet Foxhound's demands in 24 hours. $1 million, and the remains of the legendary soldier Big Boss. Put between a rock and a hard place, the US government calls Solid Snake out of retirement and sends him in once again to infiltrate the facility and put a stop to Metal Gear before nuclear warfare begins. Metal Gear Solid takes a lot of cues from its predecessor, Metal Gear 2, and has often been cited as a 3D adaptation of that game, much like other early 3D titles like Ocarina of Time when compared to A Link to the Past. Gameplay is more involved, characters have voice-acted work, which still sounds good over 25 years later, and the overall writing feels more extensive. Metal Gear Solid can be found on the PS1, PS3 shop, PC, as a part of the Legacy Collection, and the upcoming Master Collection, so you should be able to play it via that bundle on your console of choice. There is one other method to play the classic, which is via the GameCube remake, Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. With updated graphics, redone voice acting, and new gameplay mechanics borrowed from the recently released at the time Metal Gear Solid 2, Twin Snakes has a lot of merits over its PS1 counterpart. Yet, I would be absolutely remiss to not mention the issue people take with this version. Although I quite enjoy the voice acting and delivery from Twin Snakes, some people will swear by the original, but the biggest problem seems to be the changes made to action-oriented cutscenes. As a legendary soldier, Snake is gonna do some crazy things, like fight cyborg ninjas or giant bipedal mechs that make animal cries, but the original Metal Gear Solid keeps the action as grounded as it can be with such a premise. Twin Snakes, on the other hand, sometimes seems like Michael Bay got lost, wandered into developer Silicon Knights headquarters, and hijacked the role of director for the day until the police escorted him from the premises. I don't think there's any better way to explain it than just showing the differences, so check this out.
Oh my god!
Yeah, so I can understand why people don't like this, but I kind of love it. It's absurd, but it also doesn't devalue the powerful emotional moments surrounding it. Honestly, I don't think you can go wrong with the original or Twin Snakes, and it comes down to which one is more accessible or tickles your fancy. The issue with Twin Snakes is... what is wrong with this world? Finally, we have my final starting point, as well as the one that I began the series with, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Despite having a 3 in the title and releasing in 2004, Snake Eater is a prequel and the first entry in the series chronologically, going all the way back to 1964 with the stage of the Cold War, and over 30 years before the original Metal Gear. This game follows the man codenamed Naked Snake as he dives into Russia on the Virtuous mission, trekking through the Soviet jungles in order to rescue scientist Dr. Sokolov from a rogue group known as the GRU, who are forcing him to design a metal monstrosity known as the Shagohod, which is capable of mobily launching a nuclear strike. However, due to interference, Sokolov is taken from Snake's grasp, and the Soviet Union and United States are on the verge of nuclear war. In order to prevent this, Snake is ordered to redeploy into the jungles to destroy the Shagohod, stop the leader of Gru, Colonel Volgan, and commit an act that questions whether his loyalty lies with a loved one or his country. Metal Gear Solid 3 is typically heralded as the best game in the series, and for very good reason. It has a wide breadth of campy moments, but also has an incredible, emotionally gripping story. Naked Snake portrays a wider range of emotions via his body language and facial expressions compared to the leads in previous entries, and you get really attached to this guy and his struggles. The jungle setting is also very unique, serving as a stark contrast to the darker, colder metallic environments that served as the setting for all the previous games. Additionally, this game via later releases opted for a behind-the-back, third-person movable camera as opposed to the bird's-eye view from the earlier Solid entries, which really adds to the experience. Toss in the survival system where players must scavenge for food and materials to eat in order to keep their stamina up or treat ailments and wounds, and you have yourself one of the most fun and polished stealth games available. Metal Gear Solid 3 is available on a wide selection of consoles, including its original home, the PS2, the HD collection on the Xbox 360, PS3, and Vita, the Legacy collection, and Volume 1 of the Master Collection. You're not exactly short on options with Metal Gear Solid 3, but if you're feeling really bold, Snake Eater 3D on the 3DS. This was actually the original version I played and how I began my Metal Gear journey. The Circle Pad Pro does work with this version, and it has some neat changes like the ability to crouch walk and take a picture of something to use as a camo. Crouch walking is honestly huge, but the frame rate is pretty rough, and you're truthfully better off playing it on other systems. Over a year after Snake Eater released, an updated version of the game subtitled Subsistence came out, and if you do plan to play this on the PS2, I very highly recommend you pick up Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater Subsistence over the original. Subsistence includes the new camera, a demo feeder for viewing cutscenes, a boss rush mode of sorts, a secret feeder, and the playable versions of Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2. As you can tell, it's much more content-rich, but most of the quality of life changes are available in all future versions, as long as you aren't too sad about losing the secret feeder and Ape Escape mission. The last option available for Snake Eater comes in the form of the remake Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. Konami has gone on record to say that they won't be touching the story, and that any changes are going to be in regards to the presentation or to polish the gameplay, which I think is a good change because the controls can be a little cumbersome at first for new players. While I am incredibly excited, I completely understand the skepticism going into this, and, well, I don't want to date the video anymore, but we'll just have to wait and see. If you're looking for a very refined, mechanic-deep game that emotionally moves you and pays homage to 20th century spy films, Snake Eater is definitely a fantastic starting point and the fan favorite. So, to briefly summarize, my 3 recommended points are Metal Gear, Metal Gear Solid, and Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, specifically Subsistence or the HD edition. Although it's very easy to recommend picking up Metal Gear Solid the Legacy Collection as it includes all of these titles, that's not realistic for everyone with the ever-growing price point, so the HD editions are just fine and give you access to the original Metal Gear games, Metal Gear Solid 3 and Metal Gear Solid 2, as well as Peace Walker for the console versions. Additionally, the upcoming Master Collection could serve as an excellent replacement for all subsequent versions and could be the best method of playing the games if you're in no rush to do so. While I do not think there is a bad game from these 3, I do believe Metal Gear could be the most jarring or difficult for some players to get into the series with. So, Metal Gear Solid is a safer starting point, with my personal recommendation being Metal Gear Solid 3. But again, it is ultimately your choice. These are just the 3 that I believe are the easiest to get into and don't really require background information that you might need for something like Metal Gear Solid 2, and definitely 4. Okay, so you've selected your starting game. Where do you go from here? For the original Metal Gear, you'll want to work through Metal Gear 2, then move to Solid 1 and go all the way to Solid 4. Once you've finished 4, play Peace Walker and then both parts of V. the prologue Ground Zeroes, and the main game Phantom Pain to get the full release order experience. You could also toss in some of the spin-offs like Revengeance and Portable Ops that fit into the overall timeline, but have contested canon status since they weren't directed by Kojima. While Portable Ops' gameplay isn't that riveting, the story is actually quite good, and Revengeance is both accessible and very much worth your time. I normally don't recommend this, but it might be worth watching through a cutscene movie for Portable Ops if you lack a PSP. For the remaining graphics, I'll mark Revengeance and Portable Ops to denote their ambiguous status, but place them where they should fall in the respective play order. As for those starting with Metal Gear Solid, here's my recommendation. You can push on to Solid 2, and then play Solid 3 before jumping to Portable Ops, and then Peace Walker. Although you could fit in the MSX titles Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 anywhere, I would advise playing them before Metal Gear Solid 4 and V since they each mark the end of the saga in different ways. Finally, we have Metal Gear Solid 3. If you would like to advance the story chronologically, you'll jump to Portable Ops, then to Peace Walker, and then to V Ground Zeroes and Phantom Pain, Metal Gear 2, Solid 1, Solid 2, Solid 4, and then finish the saga with Revengeance. The only reason I don't necessarily recommend the chronological route is because Peace Walker and V will spoil some revelations in Solids 1, 2, and 4, so I kind of recommend my personal path where you play through the numbered Solid games and just shift 3 to the beginning of your list. I know this might have sounded very confusing, but hopefully the timeline and diagrams were helpful in depicting the possible routes. Up until the announcement of the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake, Metal Gear is a series that unfortunately didn't get much love in the last several years, but the impact this series has had on the industry and the quality of its games are testaments to why this series is adored by so many. Like I said earlier, Metal Gear Solid 3 was the first game to ever get me to tear up, and whenever I go back and watch that moment that did it, I get hit with that surge of emotions every damn time. It's by no means a perfect series, and the story can definitely falter at times, but it's still blow for blow my favorite out there. But even with all of its accolades, I don't blame people for not playing the series. Between the bizarre order, constant claims that the story is overly convoluted, and difficulty playing it on modern consoles until recently, it's not that easy to try out. I can only hope that the recent announcements are enough to get more people to try this amazing series and find out why Solid Snake, Raiden, Big Boss, and so many more are some of the best characters in video games. I hope if you're listening to this, it's maybe gotten you interested or excited to check out the series. I'd call that a mission accomplished if so. Anyways, thank you all for watching, enjoy some Metal Gear, and until next time.